Long before the British guns thundered over the hills of Zululand, before the world knew his name, a child was born under a sky heavy with storms. His name was Shaka. But at his birth he was not a king, not a warrior, not even wanted. He came into the world in the harsh rolling hills of what is now KwaZulu-Natal, sometime around 1787. His father was Senzenga Kona, a minor chief of the Zulu clan. His mother was Nandi, a proud woman from the Langini people. Their union was frowned upon by custom. It was not sanctioned, and Nandi's pregnancy caused a scandal. Shaka's birth branded him an outcast. His father would not publicly acknowledge him. His mother, defiant and humiliated, was forced to leave the Zulu clan with her child. Together, Nandi and young Shaka wandered in exile, a mother and son without a home, surviving in hostile territory, often ridiculed, sometimes attacked. A boy growing up not as a prince but as a target. Other children mocked him, calling him names, throwing stones. Adults whispered about him as if he were a curse. Hunger and humiliation were his earliest teachers. Yet from his mother he inherited not despair but defiance. Nandi was fierce. She taught her son discipline, endurance, and pride. She told him stories of warriors and kings, of the ancestors who had faced hardship and prevailed. At night, by the flickering light of the fire, she would whisper, "Never forget who you are, Shaka. The blood of chiefs runs in your veins." It was in these years of exile that Shaka learned to run faster, fight harder, and think sharper than his peers. He developed a cold, focused strength, a mind that could endure shame without breaking, a will that could burn through pain. By his teenage years, Shaka was tall, lean, and powerful. His arms were corded with muscle from herding cattle and practicing spear drills. He carried a long throwing spear as was custom, but he practiced with it in ways that startled others, closing distance quickly, striking at close range, testing what worked and what failed. He was not yet a soldier, but already he was a student of war. Around this time, the region itself was changing. The small Nguni-speaking clans that dotted the rolling hills were bound by tradition, herding cattle, raiding occasionally, fighting small skirmishes with neighbors. There were no great armies, no standing forces, only scattered warriors called up when needed. But pressure was building. Populations were growing. Droughts and competition for land and cattle made conflicts sharper. Old ways were cracking under new realities. Into this environment, Shaka would rise, a man shaped by humiliation and hardship, stepping into a world ripe for change. His first real break came when he reached manhood and was sent, like other young men, to serve as a warrior in the army of the Mthethwa, a larger and more powerful kingdom under Chief Dingiswayo. It was here that Shaka would find a mentor, and it was here that his ideas about war would take shape. Yet before he left, there was a moment that defined him. One day, older boys from a rival clan surrounded Shaka, mocking him as usual. This time he did not back away. With a short thrusting stick, he fought back with a precision and fury that left two of them bloodied and the rest fleeing. The outcast had shown his teeth. From that day whispers changed. Some still mocked, but others watched. They saw in his eyes something relentless, a fire that would not go out. Nandi, proud but fearful, warned him, "Your strength will make you enemies, my son. Use it wisely." Shaka listened, but deep inside he was already planning. He would no longer be the boy pushed aside. He would rise so high that no one would ever dare mock him again. When he left for the Mthethwa army, he left behind not just his childhood but his name as an outcast. Ahead of him lay the training ground of warriors, the crucible in which Shaka Zulu would be forged. Drums quickening like a heartbeat as the narrator's voice drops to a whisper. An outcast no more. A soldier in the making. The storm was gathering. The rolling hills of KwaZulu-Natal glowed gold under the morning sun. In the distance, herds of cattle moved like dark shadows across the grass. Young men gathered in kraals, their spears glinting. They were not farmers today, they were warriors in waiting. Among them stood Shaka. Taller than most, lean, his eyes like sharpened obsidian. The outcast child of Nandi had become a man, and now he was stepping into the army of Chief Dingiswayo, leader of the powerful Mthethwa Confederacy. This was not the small, disorganized raiding parties of his youth. Dingiswayo's army was disciplined, organized into regiments called Amabutho. Warriors trained together, lived together, drilled together. They were not just fighters, they were a force, a prototype of what Shaka would one day perfect. Here, for the first time, Shaka learned command structures, formations, and the power of unity. Dingiswayo was a different kind of chief. He admired innovation. He encouraged young warriors to think, to adapt. And he saw something in Shaka, a mind always calculating, always testing. Under the searing sun, Shaka trained with his regiment. They ran long distances barefoot across thorny ground, toughening their feet until they could move faster than any enemy. They practiced spear throwing until their arms burned, then practiced more. They learned to form up, to charge, to retreat in unison. But Shaka was restless. He watched how battles were fought, long-range skirmishes with throwing spears, little more than ritual combat. Two sides would approach, hurl spears from a distance and retreat. Casualties were light, and the outcome often inconclusive. To Shaka this was a waste. In the quiet of the camp, he began experimenting. Instead of the long throwing spear, he favored a shorter, heavier spear, the ikuwa, designed not for throwing but for stabbing at close range. He drilled himself in closing the distance fast, using a large cowhide shield to knock aside an enemy's weapon, then thrusting the spear into the exposed body. At first, others mocked him. "This is not our way," they said. "A spear is for throwing." But when Shaka sparred with them, his method proved lethal. He closed in like a lion, shield smashing, spear striking, and the mock fight was over before it began. Dingiswayo noticed. He gave Shaka small commands, first over a few men, then over dozens. In skirmishes with rival clans, Shaka's tactics turned minor raids into decisive victories. He moved his warriors like a single creature, horns to encircle, chest to attack, loins to reserve. It was the embryo of his famous bullhorn formation. In one early battle, Shaka led his unit against a raiding party twice their number. Instead of trading spears from afar, he rushed them. Shields locked, spears stabbing, his men broke the enemy line and drove them off in panic. Dingiswayo rewarded him publicly, naming him an officer. The outcast was now a leader. Yet Shaka remained humble. At night, by the fire, he spoke little, sharpening his spear, studying others. He was building not just strength but a system, discipline, speed, aggression. He dreamed of an army unlike any Africa had ever seen. His mother Nandi, hearing of his rise, came to see him. She found a man transformed. "You have become what you were meant to be," she told him. Shaka bowed his head but his eyes burned. "Not yet," he said. "This is only the beginning." In the years that followed, Shaka became Dingiswayo's most trusted commander. He forged bonds with warriors from many clans, building loyalty that transcended old divisions. He learned diplomacy, intelligence gathering, and the power of fear and respect. But fate was moving faster than even Shaka could have planned. In 1816, his father Senzangakona, the Zulu chief, died. The small Zulu clan was weak, fragmented, vulnerable. But Shaka saw in it an opportunity, a chance to return not as an outcast but as a king. With Dingiswayo's support, Shaka moved to claim leadership of the Zulu. He crushed his rivals swiftly, reorganized the clan into his own model of regiments, and began uniting neighboring clans under his banner. The experiment he had begun in the Mthethwa army was now becoming a revolution. The boy who had once been mocked was now transforming an entire nation. By the end of the decade, the hills of Zululand trembled under the footfalls of his regiments. The Zulu were no longer a minor clan. They were an army, fast, disciplined, and deadly. And at their head, in leopard skin kilt, spear and shield in hand, was Shaka, the outcast turned warlord. The world had never seen anything like him. Drums pounding faster, a lion's roar echoing faintly under the narrator's voice. The storm had broken. The Zulu nation was rising. Across the fertile valleys of southern Africa, whispers were spreading. A new leader had risen among the Zulu, a man of unbreakable will, forged in exile, sharpened in battle. His name was Shaka. And he was about to turn a small clan into a storm. The year was 1816. Senzangakona, chief of the Zulu, had died. Rival factions moved to claim the throne. The clan itself was little more than a scattering of homesteads, poor, divided, and hemmed in by stronger neighbors. Few believed it could survive, let alone rule. But Shaka was not like other claimants. He returned not as an exile but as a seasoned commander under Dingiswayo, the most powerful chief in the region. Behind him he brought not just warriors but a new way of war, discipline, speed, and terror. On the day of his return, the kraals of the Zulu buzzed with tension. Elders whispered. Women hid their children. Yet when Shaka strode into the main enclosure, tall, bare-chested leopard skin kilt swaying, shield and ikuwa spear in hand, silence fell. He did not speak softly. He spoke as one who already commanded. Within days he crushed his rivals, using the same tactics he had refined in the Mthethwa army. No longer did the Zulu fight at a distance. His regiments charged, shields interlocking, stabbing spears thrusting at close range. Battles that once dragged on for hours were decided in minutes. Survivors fled carrying tales of terror. But Shaka's vision was bigger than conquest. He reorganized the Zulu from the ground up. Every man of fighting age was drafted into regiments, Amabutho, based on age groups. They trained year-round, lived in military kraals, and moved as a single organism. Women and elders were relocated to support settlements, freeing warriors for constant readiness. He drilled them not only in weapons but in running. Barefoot over thorns, through rivers, across hills, they covered incredible distances at speed. Shaka banned sandals. A warrior's feet must be as tough as his heart, he said. Within months his army could appear where enemies least expected, striking like lightning. The Ikawa became standard issue, a short, broad-bladed stabbing spear named for the sound it made when pulled from a wound. The long throwing spear was relegated to secondary use. Shaka also perfected his formation, the bull horns. The chest of the bull engaged the enemy frontally. The horns swung wide to encircle. The loins, weighted in reserve, ready to exploit weakness. No African army had ever been so organized. Neighboring chiefs laughed at first. Then they wept as their forces were annihilated. But Shaka was more than a warlord. He was a strategist, a state builder. He consolidated conquered clans, incorporating survivors into his regiments rather than slaughtering them. In return for service they gained protection and a place in a growing nation. He broke down old clan loyalties and replaced them with loyalty to the king. By 1818 the Zulu were no longer a minor clan. They were a rising power whose black and white shields glimmered on every horizon. Chiefs who once despised Shaka now sent tribute or fled. Still, Shaka honored his benefactor Dingiswayo. The Mthethwa chief remained an ally, and for a time their combined power dominated the region. But destiny would not allow two suns in one sky. In 1817 Dingiswayo was captured and killed by a rival chief named Zwide of the Ndwandwe. The Mthethwa confederacy began to crumble. In the chaos Shaka moved swiftly. He absorbed what remained of Dingiswayo's followers into his own army. He swore vengeance on Zwide. And then he began forging the Zulu nation not as a vassal but as an independent kingdom. The war with Zwide became Shaka's first great test as king. The Ndwandwe were numerous, fierce and confident. But Shaka's regiments were faster, better drilled, and led by a man who understood not just battle but psychology. In one campaign he lured Zwide's forces deep into Zulu territory, cutting them off from water, harassing them with small attacks, and then striking with his full force when they were weakened. In the decisive Battle of Cockley Hill, Shaka used the terrain to trap and destroy a much larger Ndwandwe army. His bull horns formation enveloped the enemy while the reserve loins struck their center. The slaughter was complete. After this victory Shaka's reputation became mythic. Chiefs whispered that he was protected by spirits, that no spear could touch him. His warriors sang songs of his cunning. Mothers frightened children with his name. Yet Shaka's power was not only built on fear. He maintained strict discipline, rewarding bravery, punishing cowardice, but also feeding and clothing his warriors. He established vast herds of cattle to support the army and organized networks of spies and messengers. His kingdom was a machine and he was its heart. But his methods were harsh. He executed dissenters, destroyed rebellious clans and uprooted thousands. Entire regions were depopulated in the upheavals of war, a period later known as the Mfikane, the crushing. Refugees fled in all directions, carrying his innovations with them, reshaping southern Africa. By 1820, the Zulu kingdom stretched far beyond its original borders. Homesteads became military camps. Boys grew up dreaming not of tending cattle but of joining Shaka's regiments. The Zulu were no longer a people, they were a power. At dusk, in his great kraal at Kwabulawayo, Shaka stood watching his warriors drill. Thousands of shields moved as one. The air was filled with the stamp of feet, the thud of spears on shields, the chants of war. His mother Nandi, now revered as the Queen Mother, watched proudly. "You have made the Zulu strong," she told him. Shaka's gaze did not waver. "Strong is not enough," he said. "We must be unstoppable." And so the boy who had once been mocked was now shaping a kingdom whose shadow fell across all southern Africa. But his greatest battles and his greatest tragedies were still to come. Drums rising, the sound of marching feet, then silence. The sun rose over Zululand like molten gold, shining on kraals so vast they seemed like small cities. Regiments of warriors drilled in endless lines, black and white shields flashing, spears glinting. The air was alive with chanting, the rhythm of feet, and the pulse of a kingdom at its height. This was Shaka's hour. By the early 1820s, he had transformed a minor clan into the most powerful kingdom in southern Africa. His armies were feared from the Drakensberg to the Indian Ocean. His tactics, the bull horns, the short stabbing spear, the relentless speed, had swept aside every enemy. Refugees scattered across the land, new states rose from the chaos, all shaped by his example. In his great royal kraal at Kwabulawayo, Shaka presided like a general and a king combined. The enclosure sprawled over a vast area, ringed by thousands of huts for his regiments, storage pits for grain, and cattle pens for the herds that sustained his people. At its center stood the royal compound, a circle of huts where Shaka held council, dispensed justice, and planned campaigns. Every morning before the sun climbed high, he walked among his warriors barefoot, inspecting their shields, their spears, their feet. He spoke not as a distant monarch but as a commander whose word was law. A soldier must be as strong as the spear he carries, he would say. His presence alone sent a shiver down spines. Tall, lean, wrapped in leopard skin, eyes like cold iron. He had become a living legend. Songs praised his victories. Chiefs who once mocked him now sent tribute or risked annihilation. Envoys from European traders arrived at Port Natal with gifts, hoping for safe passage and trade. They called him King of the Zulu, and marveled at his discipline and organization. But Shaka's power was not only military. He imposed a new order across his kingdom. Cattle were redistributed to bind conquered clans to his rule. Marriage and settlement were regulated to keep regiments at full strength. Messengers raced along hidden paths carrying his commands. Spies reported on distant chiefs. His word could move thousands like a single man. At the peak of his power, Shaka began to dream beyond war. He invited European traders to bring goods, cloth, beads, guns, though he remained wary of their intentions. He sought to build alliances and to understand these pale-skinned strangers whose ships came from the sea. He was no mere brute, he was a strategist watching the future approach. Yet even as his kingdom reached its zenith, shadows lengthened. War had forged the Zulu, but endless war also strained them. Regiments grew restless. The land was scarred by battles, the population uprooted by conquest. Neighbors feared and hated him, and some plotted revenge. Closer to home, Shaka's own temperament began to harden. He had always been disciplined, but now he became increasingly harsh. He executed those who showed the slightest disobedience. He drove his regiments to exhaustion. Some whispered that the king had lost his mercy. Then came the blow that cracked his heart. In 1827, Nandi, his mother, his protector, his pride, fell gravely ill and died. For Shaka, it was as if the ground beneath him vanished. The boy who had survived exile and ridicule had always drawn strength from her. Without her, something inside him broke. His grief was terrible. He ordered a massive mourning ceremony across the kingdom. 4 months normal life was suspended. Crops were left unplanted. Milk was forbidden. Thousands of cows were slaughtered as offerings. Those who failed to display sufficient grief were executed. It was as if Shaka tried to freeze the entire nation in his sorrow. The kingdom trembled under his mourning. Allies grew uneasy. Enemies sensed weakness. Even his own brothers began to plot. In the midst of his grief, Shaka's paranoia deepened. He suspected plots everywhere. Loyal commanders were executed on suspicion alone. He pushed his regiments to extremes, demanding new campaigns despite exhaustion. The man who had once inspired loyalty now inspired fear. Yet he remained a genius of war. Even in his darkest days he planned campaigns, reorganized regiments, and kept the Zulu machine running. Europeans who visited still marveled at his power. But beneath the surface, cracks were spreading. By 1828, Shaka had built an empire that stretched from the Tagala to the Pongola, a kingdom of tens of thousands bound by discipline and terror. But he had also created enemies at every level: rival chiefs, dispossessed refugees, even his own kin. On quiet nights, he would stand alone outside his hut, staring into the darkness, the wind whipping the grass. Did he sense what was coming? Did he know that the kingdom he forged in fire was about to turn its fire inward? The boy who had risen from nothing, the man who had crushed his enemies, was now surrounded by shadows he could not crush. The stage was set for the final act. The sound of a single drumbeat, slow and ominous, echoing into silence. The winds that once carried Shaka's war songs now carried whispers of rebellion. The kingdom he had forged in fire was vast and strong, but its heart, the king himself, had begun to falter. After his mother Nandi's death, Shaka's grief turned to suspicion, and suspicion to tyranny. His regiments were driven past exhaustion. His laws grew harsher. Even his allies trembled. He executed those who hesitated, uprooted entire clans on rumors, and demanded new campaigns though the land cried for peace. Once, his warriors had fought for him out of loyalty and pride. Now many fought out of fear. Around the fires at night, some murmured, "The king has lost the favor of the spirits." Others wondered if the outcast boy had become the tyrant he once hated. In the shadows of Kwabulawayo, two figures watched and waited, Dingain and Mlengana, Shaka's half-brothers. Both had risen high under his rule. Both had learned from him. But both now feared him. They knew that sooner or later suspicion would turn on them. They decided to strike first. They were not alone. Mbofa, one of Shaka's trusted bodyguards, had grown disillusioned and agreed to help. A conspiracy formed, silent and deadly as a coiled snake. It was September 1828. The air was heavy with heat. Shaka, still in mourning for Nandi, had begun to plan new campaigns far to the north, even as his regiments groaned under fatigue. Rumors of his harshness spread like wildfire. Chiefs whispered, plotting. The kingdom teetered. On a day like any other, Shaka walked outside his royal hut, barefoot, tall and unarmored as he often did. He had summoned a few of his closest men. Among them were his brothers Dingain and Mlengana. And Mbofa. He was discussing military plans when Mbofa suddenly stepped forward. In a flash, he drove his spear into the king. Shaka staggered, eyes wide with disbelief. Before he could shout, Dingain and Mlengana struck as well. Spears pierced the man who had never been defeated in battle. The mighty king fell without a war cry, without an army, cut down not by foreign invaders but by his own blood. As he lay dying, blood pooling beneath him, Shaka is said to have whispered a prophecy. "You will rule, Dingain, but you have destroyed the house of Shaka. The white men will come, and you will not be able to stand against them." With that, the outcast who became a king, the warrior who built an empire, was gone. Word spread like fire through the kingdom. Some wept. Others celebrated. Dingain seized power quickly, executing Shaka's loyalists and consolidating control. The Zulu kingdom survived, but something essential had died with Shaka. Yet his legacy would not fade. Under Dingain and later kings, the Zulu remained powerful. They would fight the British and the Boers, their warriors still using Shaka's formations, their discipline still echoing his drills. The name Zulu became a symbol of African might and resistance. But Shaka's influence went beyond the battlefield. His military innovations reshaped southern Africa. Refugee movements created new states like the Ndebele under Mzilikazi. The Mfikane, the crushing, he unleashed redrew the map. Even European colonizers had to reckon with the power he created. To this day, his story is told not just as the rise and fall of a king but as a transformation, of a people, of a region, of history itself. In the end, Shaka's life was a paradox. He was both nation-builder and destroyer, visionary and tyrant, a man who lifted his people yet drenched the land in blood. He rose from humiliation to power unmatched, only to be undone by the same ruthlessness that had built his throne. And so the boy mocked as an outcast became the king whose shadow still stretches across Africa. The drums fade. The wind rises. Over the plains of KwaZulu-Natal, his name still rides the air like a battle cry. Shaka, the warrior king. The storm who changed Africa. Drums rolling like thunder, then silence.